Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Future of the Workplace and Offices in Africa webinar. This is our fifth webinar in our COVID-19 Impact on African Real Estate series. Last week, we focused on developments and construction, and this week we'll be continuing the discussion by looking at the future of the workplace in Africa and what this means for landlords, occupiers, as well as also for the property and facilities management sector. Today for the panel, I would like to introduce our moderator who will be setting the scene and driving the discussion. This is Tayo Adunsi, who's the CEO of Northcourt. And our panelist for today, who is Michael Eldridge, CEO from Kofisi, Jamil Dawadu, Managing Director, CBRE Accelerate Nigeria, Iraku Azinge, the Country Lead Nigeria Houseman Group, and Irajua Badebo, Managing Director, PDI Real Estate Consultants. Thank you all for giving of your time today and for providing your insights. I would also like to give a big thank you to our headline sponsor, Standard Bank, and to our series sponsor, Nedbank, for allowing these sessions and the series to happen. For our audience, we encourage you to ask questions throughout the session. There's a chat function available. We'll also be doing interactive polls, and we'll try to take as many questions as we can throughout the session. I would like now to hand over to Tayo, who will start off with a brief introduction and then dive into the panel. So thank you and enjoy.
All right, thank you so much, Kafil. Good afternoon, good morning to everyone listening. These are very interesting times that we're living in, unprecedented. The workplace as we know it cannot remain the same again. One use class that has significantly been impacted by this pandemic definitely is the office sector. A lot of us are still working from home. There's a lockdown, and even when we go back to work, there will definitely be significant changes. So the conversations that we're going to be having today are going to be focused on what are the infrastructure changes that will need to happen, what are the things that would need to happen in terms of property and facility management, what are the healthcare, workplace healthcare features that we will now begin to see, and generally what will be the interactions between landlords and occupiers, what would they begin to look like. And it's great to have this fantastic panel speak to these things alongside myself moderating this session. So I'm just going to go straight into it, and I'm going to ask Jamil to take the first question. Jamil, in your interactions with landlords and occupiers in spaces that you manage, what are their thoughts as regards how they will be interacting with their space from a healthcare perspective? What are the healthcare features that they are considering? What are the things that they are looking at? What are the things that your occupiers are looking, to change as they resume work? Jamil, I think your mic might be off. Jamil, I can't hear you. I think you just need to turn on. Yeah. I can't hear you, Jamil. Maybe while you work on that, Erejua, do you mind taking that question?
Okay. Hi. Good morning. Do you want to just repeat what it was?
Yes. So what are the changes we can expect? In healthcare feature. Workplace healthcare features, in the past, just having fire extinguishers, having sanitary toilets and very limited healthcare features were sufficient in even the most contemporary offices.
Yes,
we can imagine that this will change. So what are the kind of healthcare features we can expect?
Well, okay. So I think that this is I don't want to say an amazing opportunity, but I do want to say it is an opportunity for us to look at the positives of what can come out of this. And one of them would be that we are going to have to start seeing more innovation in the way that we design and build our workspaces. So, for example, I mean, the thing that we have to deal with most are people's perceptions and people's worries. And if we want the real estate market, or if we want commercial real estate to regrow and regain and continue to take preeminence, then we have to think of things like, building into our offices simple things like maybe infrared cameras that can be monitored by the facility management department, so that as you walk into the building, your temperature is automatically taken. We need to consider where we place our, perhaps our toilets and so that people can gain easy access to hand washing facilities. The introduction of things like sanitizer units everywhere, and encouraging people to use them, so that people begin to regain confidence in the fact that their workplaces are safe. We also need to perhaps think about the way we design the actual workspaces. Do we want to make them more open plan with more breakout spaces or less breakout spaces? I mean, these are some of the things. Some people will say, well, offices are safer, but we've also come to realize over time that having individual offices doesn't necessarily increase productivity. I have found it extremely difficult to work at home. So I am one of those people who would be looking forward to an opportunity to getting back to an office space and regaining that discipline of getting up and going to work. But at the same time, I want to know that my facility manager is on top of the cleaning and disinfecting of the building at the end of every day. I'd want to know that, as unobtrusively as possible, people are being monitored as they come in, and people are being monitored as they come out. I know it's going. We're heading towards a real Big Brother is watching you kind of situation, but we're almost going to have to actually just accept that what we know to be our normal way of life, I think, has gone for a very long time, probably for forever. Although the upside of that is that those who come after us are never going to know a different way of life.
Yeah.
I, for one, my great-grandmother died in the Spanish flu epidemic. I don't know what changed in human beings' lives from then till now. So I have that confidence that eventually, if we in the real estate space, together with our colleagues in the design space, actually take this, the bull by the horns, where, as far as this is concerned, we could actually come out of this a lot better off than we probably envisage at this point.
Yeah, I think so. I think we will definitely be much more sanitary. I think we will definitely be much more health conscious. Michael, Kofisi manages flexi offices across the continent. From a co-working and flexi office perspective, as a landlord, and what are the feelers you're getting from your tenants? What are the type of healthcare solutions and practices that they are calling for? What are your thoughts? I think your mic is also off, Michael.
How is that?
Yeah, that's good now. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much for having me today. Yeah, well, we're a flexible workspace business. We operate all the way across the whole of Africa. We're in 5 cities, and we're in progress to be in a further 5 as we speak. We provide services across the whole range, from a single desk through to private offices and customized space for the larger corporate end. Our entry-level co-working product's only about 5% of our model. Most our average customer base is 10 to 20 people in a customized work environment, with a duration of sort of around about 2 years, which we've established as being where we thought the right point in the sector to be. I mean, for us, we've always been about a people strategy first. We've always been about making sure that our clients, we believe we're offering a service to them. We get paid to deliver great service to our clients, so we can help them be as productive as they can be in the spaces, so that they can focus on the large opportunity that presents itself across Africa. And in many cases up to now, that has been a hugely unreliable environment. And what we aim to do is to create reliability. But in the continuation of that theme, what we think is that this is going to be as much about behavioral change as it is about space change. From the building standpoint, the asset is only one part of it. And I think that's now going to become even more resonant, that you're going to be talking about the healthy state of buildings and the tenant experience that's going to occur inside those buildings. Up to now, there's been some sense that there's a detachment between the service provider ourselves and the asset owner, and there needs to be a closer alignment, because we are talking about deep redesign of spaces, but you're also talking about needing to encourage change and also to help companies continue to invest in the most important asset, which is their people, and they need to feel safe and secure in their environments when they come back to work. If you look through the macro, look through any period of time, whenever there's been an economic shift in a downturn, there tends to be an increase in outsourcing and an increase in the procurement of these kind of services to experts. And I think our industry now will benefit to the good of everyone, because I think as experts, we understand the delicate balance of space, service, technology to create those kind of environments. And now even more so, I think there was a recent survey that's pushed, safety has become the number one most important decision process in finding space. And as experts, I think the larger corporates are going to need, and the smaller businesses are going to need, to engage with companies like Kafisi to provide them that safety and security for their important asset, their people.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Michael. And I guess you touched on something that, point that I would like to raise with Miracle. Miracle, Houseman, you play in an interesting value chain of the office sector, from design, build, project management to actually managing your own flexi offices. And I guess my question will be on design. I know within this period, you probably in-house have started having thoughts as to how design of office buildings would definitely begin to change. Can you share some of your thoughts on how design, in offices and fit outs will begin to shift in reference to things that Michael has raised on safety, ergonomics, social distancing? What are changes that we can expect in design of office buildings?
Thank you, Tayo. Absolutely. I think as Michael has cited, there's going to be a change in the way we utilize workspaces moving forward, post this health crisis and beyond. And from a design perspective, I mean, we can begin to expect to see a demand in the rise, a rise in the need for social distancing to be applied even in the office design space. So we can even expect existing occupiers to want to redesign their offices, to lend itself to social distancing, with the arrangement of their furniture, the densities within the workspace, allocation of square meterage per workstation, to allow the 6 feet social distancing requirements that you need to prevent or minimize the spread of the virus within the workspace. So these are some of the things that we may begin to see occupiers demand from us from a design perspective. The trend now or pre the health crisis was to create workspaces that lend itself to collaboration. But with this health crisis, we're going to begin to pull back a little bit on that and begin to create spaces that provide personal space, to mitigate the risk of contaminating others that, may be working with you in the workspace.
Brilliant. And I'm going to pick up on that with you later, Irako, on how these design or healthcare changes, as we have it, may impact collaboration and camaraderie in the workplace negatively. And I will definitely pick up on that with you. But Jamil, okay. I guess I want you to speak to the changing role, if you have it, of the property manager and the facility manager in the wake of this pandemic. I'm just beginning to imagine how much of a healthcare worker role the property and facility manager, now takes on, in the workplace. Jamil, you've not fixed your sound just quite yet. I think there's a button you need to toggle. It needs to be blue, just right beside the one that says turn on your video. You can turn audio on as well. Can any of the other panelists hear Jamil?
I can't hear him. No.
No. Okay.
He's gone
So
again.
yeah. Okay. So I guess Eredjoa, you get to answer all Jamil's questions.
Trust me, I'm not messing with his mic.
Yeah. So,
okay. So you want to know how
the changing role of the facility manager as so to say healthcare worker.
Okay.
Yeah.
We are going to become, I mean, there's been a joke among some of us that, as a property manager, you somehow become a social worker because you're dealing with tenants issues, and then the tenants issues become their stress issues and you're dealing with all of that. And I think we're going to become health workers as well, to some extent.
Yeah.
And really, I actually don't think that that's a bad thing. I do think that over time, we have become maybe a little bit cavalier about personal hygiene and about personal spaces. And I think that one of the things that's going to happen to property and facility managers is that we're actually going to have to add to our list of things that we know. We're going to have to begin to look into public health issues a little bit more closely. I remember a time when Legionnaire's disease was a problem in buildings in the UK, and designs changed to ensure that didn't happen. And I think we're going to have to go a little bit further. It was interesting what was said earlier about designing spaces that allowed for collaboration, and now we may have to move towards designing spaces that actually protect people's personal space. But I don't really want to see that happen at the expense of collaboration in offices, because primarily people go into offices and take up office space because they actually see that that's going to enable their business to thrive. And if they then cannot actually collaborate in order for their business to thrive, it becomes a problem. So we as property managers are going to have to find a way to understand from a health and a social and a work perspective. We're going to have to take more time out to, I think, understand the businesses of the people who are in the spaces that we manage, in order to see how we can advise, or perhaps advise our landlords, and perhaps also advise even our tenants in their fit outs, how they can come forward and how they can design these spaces in order to allow them to collaborate without actually having without it being detrimental to them. So I think that as property managers, our remit is going to have to go beyond just providing security and cleaning and fumigation once a month and making sure the generator is working if you're in a country like Nigeria, or making sure that the windows are clean and all of that. We're actually going to have to go a step further and consider the health, I would say, of the people in the building in the responses that we give towards all these other things. I'm hoping Jamil is back online and will be
Jamil, are you back?
To add. Yes, I can hear you all. I don't know if you can hear me now.
Yes,
yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah, it's great to have you back, Jamil.
Good.
Finally.
Yes. And Jamil, I mean, I think I would just like you could touch on the healthcare question, but let me just ask you this. Do you think that renters are going to start taking less space in the wake of this, in a bid to reduce the interaction between workers and perhaps have some workers work from home? Would they have staggered work, protocols or things like that?
Well, Ty, thank you. We are going to see a drastic change in the commercial industry, especially commercial spaces. Now, pre the COVID-19, we had already seen companies trying to implement flexi working and reducing their workspace in order to be able to reduce cost. Now we're we're now faced with a pandemic that has now changed how occupiers are looking at commercial space. I mean, prior to the COVID-19, not a lot of people were used to doing, more like sessions like this online, having more online meetings and the likes of it. Even when we had the conference calls and the video conferences, we still had physical meetings. That's going to change. And once that starts to change, people are now going to start to ask themselves, do we really need 500 square meters? Now, when you talk about the social distances, we're going to see a change in planning permissions. We're going to see a change in the authorities changing how approvals are given for designs. That's going to change the dynamic of things. And then because companies are now going to start looking at how do they reduce their cost overheads. Now, the COVID-19 has impacted on a lot of businesses. Now, it's going to take us almost about a year to cover back, depending on the size of the organization. Most of the FTSE 100 companies are going to look at almost 2 years to try and get their stock shares back online. Now, how do we cope within that short term and long term going forward post COVID-19? Is you're going to see more implementations of working from home. You're going to see companies reducing their workspace and providing alternative working solutions. And in my view is that you're now going to have more vacancy spaces. Now, landlords have to be more dynamic. They're going to have to give more rent reductions, more incentives to be able to incentivize occupiers to come into the building, which we've already seen before the COVID-19. But that's going to change the dynamics of everything. So with that in mind is what are landlords going to do with the current spaces they have, with the current vacancy spaces yet to come on board? And the only solution is that they have to find what to do with it. And that's where you have the co-working initiative will come into play, is because we have to put a dynamics into how these spaces are going to be occupied. Most companies are going to have a cash flow issues, and they would want to go to a more flexible solution where if another pandemic does happen, because we are now going to start putting strategies in places for epidemics and pandemics in place, because this has taken us all by surprise. And when you do that is you now want to have a flexible lease, a flexible payment system. And most of the occupiers who will be readily able to provide those services will be the co-working solutions. You're going to see an increase in technology where we're going to have more of this online meetings and virtual meetings will take place. So the requirement for large office spaces will dramatically reduce, because if you have half your workforce either having that shit system coming into the office, you have a percentage of those who have the capability to work from home and have the equipment to work from home, then ideally you would only need to have an office space should the need arise to actually come into the office to do a transaction or to come into the office to do certain things. But it's going to change our mindset, and most of what we're going to be doing now will automatically go online. And I see that's the shift. So a lot of consultants and a lot of investors and property advisors are going to have to change and adapt their ways of advice to their clients come post COVID-19, even now as we speak. Because now you have people who pay rent on a yearly basis, have been out of the office for about a month. How do you account for that loss in revenue? How do you account for the cost overheads? So we're going to have to see innovative ways of how we're working, and that's going to impact on rentals. The rentals, I don't like using the word will reduce, but I would say the commercial market will self-correct itself in regards to demand and supply.
Brilliant. Interesting points you raised there, Jamil. And I guess I'm just going to feed that into my question to Michael. So, Michael, what Jamil is saying is that a lot of corporates will potentially reduce their the floor space that they are taking and may begin to subscribe to co-working. Now, I can imagine that a lot of your current co-workers might be SMEs. And there's a school of thought that says a lot of them who've been working from home now would just stay on to continue to work from home. Do you see that trend actually taking place? And do you see your users kind of reclassifying from being SMEs to the corporates that are leaving the spaces that Jamil was talking about? Michael, your sound is off.
There we go. I'd say that we've always been quite fascinated by the ecosystem that actually occurs inside our centers and any kind of flexible workspace environment, because most of the businesses, they all feed off each other. The fresh ideas of the individual collaborating up to the idea of the legitimacy that you get by being around the big companies. I think that will continue to be of appeal. And I think there's plenty of evidence of a need throughout the ages to be able to come together to reaffirm your beliefs and work together. You know, we've been doing it on Sundays forever, right? And so I think the idea of having the physical space for people to come into, but I would agree that the idea of blended working is absolutely going to be part of the trend. I think we're going to see some really interesting behavioral changes in that, though, because as I'm sure all of my panelists agree, there's been some wonderful things about being at home, getting to see your children, but also having to manage background noise, is very difficult. So there is always going to be a need to come to work, but then that means that the idea that you come to work to be more productive may take a different shape, because you may want to be fixed located at your space. You may well even have meetings with people who are in the office with you in the same physical space, but you don't leave your desk. We certainly have found as a company and with our clients, we were talking with one of our major clients who's across three different cities, and we were sharing notes that actually the meetings are becoming more productive. Once you handle the change in the ritual of a meeting and how it starts and ends, actually they're more productive by staying still. And so we envisage there being more of that. There's going to need to be a better, I think the idea of shared spaces is interesting. I mean, I think the value proposition of co-working in its purest sense is really going to come under some challenging times. But yet those spaces lend themselves better to this concept, because a corridor of 1 to 2 man offices, 2 desk offices, is on separate HVAC systems. That is exactly where the bigger company floor spaces need to be. And so I think that the flexible environment that's been built up, and it's a well-tested model globally, is very suited to handle these changes. And I think the idea of where the dial sits between space and service is going to be much more at the service end, which is really always what the value proposition has been about.
Brilliant. And you touch on collaboration, and that's the question I just want to ask Iraku. What's your thought on the future of workplace collaboration? Is it going to stay online? Are we going to continue having online meetings, or are we still going to come into the office to have meetings? What do you think in the wake of this pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's a case-by-case basis. I mean, there are some meetings that, especially brainstorming sessions, meetings that are more technical, you would be required to be face-to-face. You need some kind of physical interaction to keep the momentum going in such meetings. So I don't think physical meetings will completely go away, or the need for collaboration will completely go away. What we may see would be a change, maybe in meeting room capacities, where you had maybe a 12-seater office, it may be reduced to 6 to 8. You may need to work or play on the densities that we are used to, with design parameters to encourage social distancing within these confined spaces. So these are the things that we may see, because you can't have all meetings virtually. Sometimes in the long run, it's not productive. Sometimes you need physical interaction to close certain deals and things like that. So I think collaboration will still remain, but the way design will have to drive how that happens.
Brilliant. Okay, so if I hear everything the panelists are saying now, it sounds like rents are going to have to moderate. Demand for space might reduce. Erejua, I want you to just bring it all together for me. Is the office subsector less desirable as a real estate asset class?
I actually don't think so.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. I think that, for those of us who are on the coast, coast of Africa, the access to broadband is a lot better than for many who are inside the body of Africa, if you like. So we've got to think about that with respect to people who perhaps don't have access to the internet like we have. Then when you talk about home working, you've got to think of all the other things that come with working from home: access to printers, access to monitors, access to internet, access to so many things. And you can't expect for people to provide their own access to these things. So again, as an office or as a company, if you're demanding, if you think of home working, you've now got to provide access to internet and internet for, you know, all these things for all the people. So there's going to be a situation where you've got to balance the safety, if you like, of home working against the productivity of what it is you're trying to achieve as a company. And you then come back to, you know what, we're going to have some kind of co-working, not co-working in Michael's sense, but, you know, working together as a company. Whether or not you're going to have the big head office with everybody coming in and commuting halfway across the country to get to the big head office, or you're going to have a series of little regional offices and people meeting together online from these regional offices, you know, it's for each company to decide. As an investor, I don't see that it's an asset class not worth having. But I do agree with Jamil that particularly in places like, well, I can speak very well for Lagos, for example, where we've seen the rentals rise above, far and above the rate of rise for other asset classes. Maybe there'll be some moderation or there will have to be some leveling or some kind of realignment of rentals. But definitely, I do think that the it's how, as an industry, we respond to the new challenges that COVID-19 is bringing us. And it's not just COVID-19. Truth of the matter is that there's been a pandemic waiting to happen virtually every year since I can remember. We had Ebola, that could have caused its own problems. We have Lassa fever, there's Zika, there's so many things that are, but this is the one that has kind of closed the whole world down, and it's unique in that respect. But what it does is that it gives us an opportunity to relook at the way we do it, from the design, which is Iraku's what's it called, forte, to co-working in Michael's sense, to the kind of more traditional commercial buildings that Jamila and I are used to. But it gives us all an opportunity to look at them and actually respond holistically. And I believe that each city in Africa, each country will have to look at how best they can handle it for their country. I know it doesn't sound great, but I do believe that, you know, for us in Nigeria, where we have a lot of problems with electricity and, you know, and access to the internet by people, maybe home working may not be as easy for some people. So we've got to consider that. And then maybe those where the countries are a lot less densely populated as ours, they may be able to reutilize some of their spaces. But what I do hope I would see is a move more towards having the planners sort of designate spaces a little bit better. So we don't have so many, I don't know, commercial offices in houses, because that is going to consider the house design. It's going to make commuting even more difficult. So maybe there are opportunities here for us to look at so many aspects. But I do believe that each, you know, I just think that each city is going to have to look at this a little bit differently from the other, depending on what their infrastructure will allow.
Okay. Okay, brilliant. Okay, so I mean, Jamil, so what's the winning formula? How can landlords differentiate if they will be able to bite into the office market that remains? What are the things that they can put in place to be able to attract market?
Well, you know, there are two things. One, landlords have to come to the reality that the dynamics of the commercial market has changed and is changing. That's the first thing. We know that a lot of Nigerian, and I'll speak, you know, particularly to Nigeria, my experience here is landlords are very stubborn or hesitant to accept that how the global market affects commercial markets in different countries. Sooner or later, it's going to catch up to us. And, you know, but the thing about it is that each landlord, you have to look at each property or each asset class in its own individual context. One is the flexibility of the design. Is the building easily adaptable to be able to change to the market trends? Now, at the initial start, when you advise clients about having flexible a building design that is easily adaptable to the market trends, a lot of them don't understand what we mean by that. And COVID-19 is one of those things now. So a lot of builders are going to go through what we call some sort of renovation come post-COVID-19. to be able to put in some more healthcare implementations in place. Now, having said that, occupiers, because you see, it goes both ways. It's going to be a balance between both ways. You're going to have occupiers now looking at the safety of their own employees, right? In the sense that you're now going to be looking at locations of where your employees are coming in from. Are these employees in high risk areas? Will they pose a threat if they actually come into the office? Now, in Lagos, we know that majority of the offices are in Surulere, Ikeja, Ikoyi, Victoria Island, but most people live miles apart. So companies are now going to start to strategize. Those who have infrastructure, because basically, again, another thing is infrastructure, like Eredro said about internet connectivity and having a suitable place to work from home. So companies are now going to start looking at locations where their staffs can do less travel and to be able to get into a space to work. And the only way to do that is if you've got 3 people staying in Mawai, for example, and they have to come in, and they're quite crucial, they'll have to find the nearest location to be able to work from. And the only solution to that will be going into a co-working space in a location closer to them to be able to work from there, and they can still connect into the office. So the dynamics of that, and once that starts to happen, the landlords are going to ask themselves, do I want to move with the trend of the market and get a slice of the market, or do I sit back and be the king in an empire with no tenants at all, or with a large vacant space? So, and that's where the reality is going to come in. So it's a question of, rather than saying rents will drop, the market will self-correct itself because our attitude is going to change. And once that attitude changes, the dynamics of the market will change. And that's what I said, that we're going to see a lot of more co-working solutions coming on board, because that's going to be part of the solution a lot of the big corporate organizations will be putting in place, because now you have to think about the health of your staff. You have to think about the distance they travel. You have employees who have to get onto public transport. Now, for those who get on public transport, you will regard it, especially taking the context of Nigeria, not looking at it from a European perspective. It is our transportation system is a jungle. And when you go to the bus, if you have about 20 people struggling to get onto one bus, it's the easiest place to even catch or spread any form of virus or disease. So that's going to be taken into consideration. So you're going to have to say which staffs are high risk, and which staffs are low risk, which staffs need to come into the office to work, and what are the solutions can we provide for the high risk to be able to still work in locations closer to their homes. So all that is going to change, and landlords will have to be able to adapt to that market, and we're going to see rents will drop. We don't have a choice. I mean, the $750 rent, if you have less companies occupying less spaces, that's a drop in income for the landlords. And in order to sustain that, landlords will have to come up with different sets of packages, larger incentives, larger fit-out periods, and the likes of. Nobody can really determine how this is going to pan out. What we're saying is that we think and we hope that landlords will play a bigger role in the trend of how the market is going, because if people are going out of business, then the landlords are having income coming in. So there's got to be a balance between the landlords and the occupiers in order to find the perfect solution.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jamil. All right, Iraku, what's the co-working perspective to this? What do co-working landlords and operators need to put in place to bite the market share that remains?
I think, like Jamil has rightfully stated, and Michael previously, that co-working will need to fill that void to create a working environment for people that necessarily cannot work from home, especially in the region that we find ourselves, where we have difficulties on the public infrastructure to support this. So co-working will lend themselves to provide business services and then create hubs so that companies can have a restructure of their workforces, probably segmenting people that need to work in specific areas across the city rather than traveling long distances to come to a specific place to all work. So with that, co-working solutions need to start. I mean, we already have that's already the premise of co-working solutions, giving companies the ability to scale. So what we will just need to do is we would need to create spaces. I think the provision of shared workspaces may not necessarily thrive from a health and safety point of view, because I don't think companies will want to expose or more or less expose their staff to working with different people from different places, all in the name of working in a co-working facility. What we may need to start seeing will be a shift to more private offices. So we may need to start working on those densities. So instead of having 70% shared hot desking in your co-working facility, you may need to change that aggregate to lend itself to still maintain social distancing, and then have companies buy into preserving the health and safety of their employees within your facility.
Okay, brilliant. So within co-working, there's probably going to be a shift from hot desking to private
Absolutely. I
offices.
mean, yeah, we wouldn't still see, the same metrics that we were dealing with just having hot desking and shared spaces more in co-working facilities, because then it presents itself with a different health and safety risk.
Okay, brilliant,
Sorry,
brilliant.
Ty, just
Yeah.
to add to that, just to add to that, what Erica said, and that's where the collaboration is going to come in, because the co-working dynamics will change in terms of how space allocation is given. Now, obviously, for them to provide those, there's a cost element. And in order to make those numbers work, there must be collaborations with the landlords as well, because the co-workers now might require more space in order to be able to provide those individual office solutions. So one can't leave off the other. And that's where we're going to see where that reduction in rental income and where those deals will be made in order to be able to provide those services.
Brilliant, brilliant. Definitely collaboration is required to win this. Erejua, I have the economics question of the day for you.
Oh
Um,
God.
so the thing is, since I can remember, CBDs and centralized office districts have been the way to go. In the wake of all of this, and a few things Jamil has spoken about in terms of offices trying to set up their staff very within close proximity to where they live, are CBDs and centralized business districts and office districts, are they an endangered species?
Yes and no. I think yes, in the sense of being, I think just having one CBD per city, for example. I think we're going to have to look. For me, this whole thing, I've been listening to a lot of seminars about this COVID-19, and I'll be honest and say only maybe 1% of them has been real estate related. They've actually been economics related and all sorts of other things, health and all of that. And I think that if we are going to win it, our collaboration is going to have to be more than just landlords and tenants and all of that. We're going to have to rope in the financial sectors. We're going to have to rope in the planners. We're going to have to rope in the banks and all of that. And we're going to have to fight it collectively as a society. And the reason I say this is because typically when you did, your cities, you designed your cities and you had your business districts and you had your residential districts and you had maybe some areas for play. But actually, the same way buildings went to sort of multi-use buildings where you had residential, office, retail, everything all in one space, we're going to actually probably have to look now at reordering some of our planning laws so that within each area or each district or each suburb, we try and have those areas that are business and then those areas that are residential and those, but we all within much smaller clusters. And the reason I still think that it's a good idea to separate them is because they bring with them, for those of us who manage these spaces, they bring with them different security issues. Areas that are totally CBDs tend to close off at night. So you now find you want to bring in your restaurants and your cafes, but because of social distancing, we're not necessarily going to have those for a while. So perhaps if we can have them in smaller areas, or perhaps because it's easier to cater for them from an infrastructure point of view. They have different parking densities, they have different needs for electricity, they have different needs and timing for the internet. So I do think that there won't be CBDs like we know them going forward. I think those will change slowly, although it'll be a very, very, very gradual shift, because you can't sort of just say, oh, today Victoria Island or Lagos or I don't know, Johannesburg, Santon doesn't exist anymore, and therefore. But I do believe that now planners are going to have to look at creating some of those CBDs within the smaller districts, so that, as Jamil and Iraku have said, we can actually create little co-working spaces closer to where people live, and then you cut down on this massive commute. Because, just as an aside, one of the things that the one thing that I have really, really enjoyed during this state is just watching the recovery of the planet from the lack of movement of human beings. And for me, that's something I would love to be able to see continue without, without necessarily completely changing our way of life. So if we can commute less, if we can walk to work, to reduce those commuting issues, because some, like you've pointed out, Jamil, how do you mix people who are getting on public transport from, I don't know, Makoko into Victoria Island, for example, as a Lagosian? If people could walk to work and keep some measure of social distancing, then it helps the office space as well. If we could redesign them such that, because interestingly enough, even though we may say we only want 20 people in an office, we might actually need far more space now than we did then in order to keep those social distancing spaces. So we have, how do we balance social distances versus space? How do we balance rent versus space? How do we balance commuting? How do we have co-working? And Michael has said it, the reason for co-working came because you get so much more innovation when people collaborate. And unfortunately, that is going to remain the case for as long as we remain human beings. So we've got to think, how can we put all these things together? And I don't think this is just a real estate issue. I think this is going to have to be human beings looking collectively, and each profession or each area and each how do I say it, each aspect, those who are the technology experts, they've got to think, how can they improve live and work? Because we also need some of these buildings for the pension funds. We also need them. Do you see? So we can't sort of say, oh, you know what, everybody work from home and all of that. How do we sustain some of these things? And then, I don't know, taxes. There's so many things that are tied into having companies that are thriving. And many companies, certainly, a lot of companies will find it kind of difficult, or maybe some of them might find it too expensive to completely change, and you'll find a lot of them might fall away. So I think we've got to not ignore the fact that, number one, we are created quite social. A lot of our communication is nonverbal. A lot of our collaboration is when we get together, then the ideas flow. And how can we do this safely? It falls back again to landlords and property managers coming to sit down to create some kind of, how do I put it? What's the word? Not unique selling point about the health and the safety of their building, in order to attract others, collaborating more with the Michaels and the Irakus of this world who are creating co-working spaces, so that you can actually do that. And my last point on this is that, actually, in some ways, it helps if you can have your staff in such a way that you can monitor them. So to some extent, you also want to be able to not monitor them in terms of their work productivity, but kind of, rather than just assume that anybody can come from anywhere. Maybe landlords can, or sorry, property company owners can think of more about how do they bus their staff to work to limit the amount of interaction they necessarily have with commuters. So there's so many angles, and the more I think about it, the more these things are coming through, and I'm not necessarily sounding very coherent. But there you go.
Thank you, Rachel. And I think I want to hear Jamil's thoughts on this as well, about, if CBDs are endangered species. And just to put in perspective, potentially, can CBDs get gentrified, all right, to begin to attract more residential uses, healthcare uses, or recreational uses? Is this something that we potentially will see?
Well, Taya, there will be a change. At this point, nobody can exactly tell you what's really going to happen in the next 12 months. I think it's still in early days, but what we're going to see is we're going to see a drastic change on how the CBD areas are. What that makes or what that changes is very difficult to say. For example, you have the hospitality market, for example. Hospitality market is also suffering from COVID-19 and will also have a negative impact post COVID-19 because with this, with the work from home, with the introduction of the pro-tech solutions and working, that's going to reduce a lot of corporate travel, right? And once corporate travel is reduced, you're going to have issues with the hospitality aspect of it. You have like the cinemas, for example. Where's the way forward going with that? So no one can really put their finger into the pie and tell you this is how it's going to be. But what I can tell you is that there will be a transformation on how the CBD will be viewed in another 2 to 3 years.
But what the mix
that
will
mixture
be,
is,
we can't tell.
It's on.
Yeah.
We can't, because the idea is that there are going to be people coming up with new ideas, and new ideas will start to develop due to the issue of COVID-19. But we're only going with the traditional way of thinking, which is you have the commercial, you have the retail, and you have the hospitality market. But all that's going to change because people's attitude and people's social way of life is going to change, and we will see a transformation in that. How that transformation evolves is something consultants are still dabbling about. But
all right, brilliant. Thank
difficult.
you, Jamil. Well, I will take, and I'm sure that's very useful to know that there will be a change. So we should all know that there will be a change. But what the mix will be, we don't know. So, Michael, I wasn't trying to leave you out of the conversation. I just wanted.
No, don't worry. It's okay.
I wanted Reggio and Jamil to set the scene. And what I want you to actually comment on is how you think this would change as we move across the major cities in Africa. All right, that's the big. So I had the big ask for you. What do you think the scenario will be in Lagos, in Johannesburg, as against Cape Town, as against Accra, as against Nairobi, where you're talking to us from? How do you think we're going to see differences across these cities?
Well, that's a big question, but I think to try and break that down, I think as a start point, I think we'd see the same thing in all cities. And we've always sort of talked about our product line really being completely agnostic to location. Quite frankly, the first step into legitimacy as a business is to have an address, is to have a fixed location. And we still believe that's going to be the case for all the reasons we've discussed. What we're very excited about, and actually we think is a big opportunity, is actually considering the general trajectory of where our industry sits, where Kafisi sits, was on a tremendous growth curve anyway. There's from the 800 odd centers that exist across the continent, still 25 times lower. So 25 times growth to be able to catch up to where the rest of the globe is sitting. And so we knew we were in the embryonic stages anyway. And actually what we feel has happened as a concept, as an output from this giant global social experiment is to understand this industry and the need for flexibility in more real world depth. And so I think the key word we used earlier on is innovation, but it's innovation with an opportunity to leapfrog to certain answers straight away. So there's a real opportunity here for the continent. And, we can talk about any of the gateway cities in that case. We have Lagos, Nairobi, Johannesburg, North Africa, Cairo. Any of these cities have got a real opportunity here now to actually grasp the opportunity where, I'm not the expert in this area, but, there is talk that Africa has suppressed the curve so far. These large, a lot of the pandemic data is suggesting that, it sidesteps a lot of these city interaction. We know there's going to be a new normal. We know there's going to be a change in the way the opportunity is measured. But the need in the continent to be able to grow is still fundamentally built around three forms of capital: financial, knowledge, and human, right? And we still need to be able to provide environments to be able to further the opportunities afforded to the local workforces, to the local businesses, to the pioneering companies that are coming into market. And so if you think about that in the context of how we can leapfrog to the right answer, we see this as a big opportunity because I think now people understand the need for this more, right? In many ways, it's business as normal because what we've been trying to do is to create sophisticated, reliable environments for these kinds of companies. As I said at the beginning, we've always been about the people. We've been about productivity, and we do that in three ways. We do that with our partnerships with landlords and developers, ensuring that we have the best standards in our buildings. But now for security, for safety, it's just absolutely vital that the stock is evolving to the global benchmark, that all users that are operating in these wonderful cities, they are aware, they've either used or they've seen on social media, the standards that exist, and they expect that standard for their workforces here. And there's no reason why it shouldn't be the same. That was our mission when we came to be involved in this project across the continent. Our second area has always been about designing the right kind of spaces, innovating into sophisticated formats which make use of color, which make use of space, which make use of hydration, it's making thinking about diet, wellness, all these things, okay, which contribute to a productive day. Because from our point of view, the winners are going to be in this industry are going to be those that can partner up and put the person at the front and think about, like, how can we make the day the best day possible for people who have to still come to work? Are they going to work sometimes from home, sometimes in the office? And it's that kind of thinking that will win. So you've got to be an innovator in this environment, but you've got an opportunity to step ahead. Our third area then has always been around service mentality. Now, this is an area that I think we all agree is a slight unknown, because we are talking about big behavioral change, and we've spent a lot of time talking to our customers and trying to understand, what matters to them. I mean, I think most people are at the moment just thinking about how they're going to remobilize. The idea of the redesigns that I'm pretty sure that Iraku and myself would be able to make the same case, that a lot of our clients don't understand necessarily how they're going to operate. We've just opened a large center for Google in Nigeria, and we have to consider now, is the space the right way to be? But that's all going to be part of the next phase. And I think we're in for a long period of reconciliation and thinking that through. But service mentality and thinking around that area is going to be absolutely vital. And I think that applies across every city that we operate in across Africa. So for us, this is just really about hunkering down and understanding, looking at the data, talking to our customers, understanding those partnerships with our landlords and our providers, as well as also bringing into that group the financial element, because the degree of restriction in terms of the innovation that can occur because of the third party that's involved. It's not just the service provider and the landlord, it's actually where the funding comes from. And typically, globally, I think 20% maximum is going to be allowed inside a building for co-working, reducing down to maybe 10% because of the impact that can have on valuations. But maybe that's got to change now, because we're only restricted by what's possible, and that is a triangulation between those three parties.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Michael. So I'm just going to ask Irako a quick question, and then I would try to take some questions from the chats from our attendees. Irako, I'm just thinking as I listen to Michael talk about innovation, what kind of technology do you think we can potentially bring in to in the wake of this health pandemic and a potential recession? What kind of technology can space managers like Jamil or co-working spaces like yourself, introduce?
I mean, I think I will speak on this more from an asset point of view, like a physical asset point of view. I think in terms of technology, with regards to Africa, where we are maybe far along in that process, we begin to look at options for more automation in our buildings, very effective air filtration systems, in our central cooling to ensure proper health and safety for the indoor air quality. We may begin to look at more thermal imaging options, in our facilities. So these are some of the physical things that we may begin to look at in the wake of COVID-19, whether it's in commercial, A-grade commercial development, or co-working spaces, so far it's a place where people work and you have high concentration of people, you will need to begin to tweak some of these physical assets to naturally reduce and mitigate the risk of the spread of infection. So these are some of the things that we can expect to see from a physical standpoint for facilities moving forward.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks so much, Iraku. Jamil, do you want to answer that as well? What new technology do you think may be deployed in managing real estate assets?
Well, Ty, what I can say at this point is that the companies who are entrusted with technology will come up with better solutions to solve products. At this stage, it's very difficult. I mean, we will say the usual suspects is have the infrared scanners and the temperature taken and having the water solution outside to do that. But I think in the next coming days, the likes of the Pfizer, GE, and the big technology companies will be coming out with better solutions for us to do that. So I think, the question is to watch this space, see what products are in the market that will be relevant to our relative industries, and we'll see how that will work. Because the question about technology is you would apply different sets of technology to the industrial properties as vis-a-vis to your hospitality properties as that to your commercial properties. So I think it's a question where investors are going to be looking out in the market for what product actually suits their particular asset class.
Brilliant, brilliant. Reggio, I want you to speak to operational costs. Are they going to rise or are they going to fall?
That's a very good question. I think in the short term, we're not going to be able, from a capital point of view, to make too many changes to our buildings or even necessarily to make too many changes to the way we do business, simply because people just don't have the money. Although this change will, after a while, come in, and I hope it won't be at the expense of people's jobs. So when I think of that, and I think of, I mean, we look after a shopping center, and obviously you can imagine that there's been a huge effect on the way we've had to manage it, because only out of about 30 to maybe 35, 40 tenants, only 5, which include the supermarket, a bank, and two chemists and a telecoms office, have been allowed to open, and we've had to close down entrances. We've had to introduce hand washing and sanitizers, and you can imagine how difficult that has been to provide all of this. But funnily enough, we've had to keep the electricity and the air conditioning going. And how do you now relate this back? So one of the things that's going to happen, because for everybody, it's about money at the moment, whether we like it or not, that is the truth of the matter. Companies are not making the money they are, and they're looking to landlords to please give us rental reductions. And they're also looking to facility managers to cut down on service charges. But how do you cut down on service charges when you still have to pay the people providing the services? So do I tell the cleaning company, please don't charge me this month? How do they pay their staff? Do I tell the generators maintenance company, please come and maintain my generator, but please do it free of charge because I need to cut down for my tenants? So I think certainly what's happening to us is we're looking at every single service we provide to find out what is crucial and what can wait, in order to keep those service charges as low as possible, if possible, even reduce them. Reducing is not something I think is always easy to do, but we definitely have to look at it. So, for example, if we budgeted for this year, let's just say, to clean the external facade of a glass building, twice in the year, we may cut that down to once. Or if we were going to paint the external fence, we may not paint it at all. We may just clean it. So we've got to look at those that are absolutely crucial to continue to maintain the cleanliness of the building, the security of the building, the fact that the building works, electricity, generator, that sort of thing. Those crucial ones, we may not be able to do anything about them. We've even had discussions with some of the electricity providers who've told us, sorry, we can't reduce our costs to you because that's a nationwide thing. I'm sure this will happen elsewhere. So some of the crucial aspects we may find the prices going up as those providers themselves, maybe because they have to also go to market and the costs are rising. And so we as facility managers, as property managers, are going to have to relook at our strategy for our buildings for the next 6 months, 1 year, 18 months, to see what we can defer in order that those costs are not passed back to tenants. But I would suggest to most tenants that they should unfortunately be looking at prices remaining the same at best or getting higher in the short, medium term. I'm so sorry, but that's the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
But we'll do our best, is what I'll say.
That's okay. Now I have a question for Michael. Michael, can we potentially say one takeaway of this pandemic for the African workplace, as you'd have it, is that it's increased standards and brought about globalization and awareness to best practices? Can we see this as a potential advantage of this pandemic?
Yeah, I think there's an approach. We've always sort of felt that the way to approach the opportunity and in terms of providing a productive environment is to what we consider collaborative design. Everything that we've done at Kafisi has been to blend global standards, both from what we've seen, experienced, and also hearing from our international clients, with the localized opportunity to work with local artisans in terms of creating space that feels at home to the local user. I mean, 80% of our client base is multinational, but by definition, but 95% of our 2,000 members are actually local to the city, and so it's important that you're maintaining that local design. But bringing in the integrated nature of technology is a big step forward. But I think it's always got to be integrated in terms of in that innovative step, because it's never going to be a complete substitute. Although now that trend for more technology to be able to assist in blended experience, and we're certainly making larger investments now into our technology platform in order to be able to not only connect members between cities, but also to be able to allow them to connect better inside their own teams. And we feel that that's going to be a big area of growth. But bringing that blend together is absolutely for us the right methodology, where we believe that when you look at, there is a buoyancy, there is still a mood of positivity. There was a recent survey that talked about 67% of African entrepreneurs are feeling positive about this situation, as opposed to low 30s in Asia. So I think there is that opportunity to grow, and I think we would feel, as the sort of first step, as we talked about, that our industry and environment will be a big part of that stepping stone, that lift up into the next stages of GDP potential for the cities.
Okay, thank you so much, Michael. Jamil, the 2 meter social distancing measure, do you think this will potentially be brought into the workplace? Can it, on the one hand, increase demand for larger space, or on the other hand, can this have to become like a factor that is discounted? Kind of like the way we take out toilets and columns from measuring space. Does this 2 meter requirement begin to become a discussion point between landlords and tenants?
Well, Taya, it's a topic that will come up during discussions, during negotiations. But then this is also going to trickle down from the planning authority to start with. So you're going to have new legislations coming into place enforcing that. Now, once that comes into place, it starts to change the mindset of how occupiers see their occupational space requirement. So if you're now looking at the 2 meter space, you don't necessarily now have to take a larger space to be able to accommodate everyone. That's where the thought process has to come in on alternative solutions. So if ordinarily prior to COVID-19, we had, 1,000 square meters with about maybe 20, 30, 40 staffs in the office. Now with the two meter distances or the social distances requirement put in place, one would imagine that these companies or the larger companies will need to take a larger space. No, the companies need to reduce their costs because obviously there's already a loss in their P&L to start with. And how do you reduce your overhead costs? And that's when companies start to strategize, who are the essential staffs that actually need to be in the office? Do we need 1,000 square meters with what's going on in the market? So everyone would have to go with the trend. And that will mean that you will reduce you reduce the 1,000 space that you have. You're going to look at companies will now have to either invest in home working policies to those who require it and take up space for those who don't have those infrastructures or it's not visible to provide that infrastructure. And then you start to look at those people that you will provide spaces for. You will still need your meeting rooms because it depends on what sector of the industry in which you are. So, if you're in the design and build, for example, at certain times you still need to converge in the office to look at drawings and to discuss those things. But I mean, when you look at the larger organizations, is you've got to understand who are the essential staffs that need to be in the office and who are the non-essential staffs that don't need to be in the office. So, and that's dynamic to come into play. But we will see a dramatic drop in floor space required. It's not going to increase. It's going to definitely reduce.
Okay.
Just to add to that.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, just to add to that, I think it's a great point because, as I said right at the beginning, I think we behavioral element to this that ultimately the two meter idea is not dissimilar to the concept of a lockdown, which is just to try and contain the problem as best you can. But ultimately, you're still going to have to pass people in corridors. You're still going to have to make use of lifts. You're still going to have to go into food and beverage environments. And so this whole new normal is, I think that the 2 meter rule is easily managed just by a trend back from the desk sizes have been trending down from, the 2 meter desk down to, the 1200 millimeter desk. I think we'll see that trend back up because that gives you a fixed locational space. But I would agree that actually that's just better space planning, which larger companies have already built in that amount of space. The core working is perhaps a bit more dense, but I just think the 2 meter rule it's only really the start. It's never going to be the full solution, but until the behavioral elements are understood in the community that you work in, whether that be your co-working company, family, whatever environment you're working through.
Can I add to that? Sorry,
Yes.
do you mind if I add to that? Okay, so I would agree with Michael. I think the 2 meter rule to an extent is not the new normal. We don't know what the new normal is going to be because the new normal is also dependent on a number of things. Are we going to find a cure for this virus? Is this virus self-limiting? We don't know. It's novel, so it's very new. We don't know what's going to happen. It may suddenly turn around and in a year it's run its course and suddenly it doesn't actually mutate anymore. We don't know. It may stop. The question really has to do with our behavior. And then the other thing that we have to think about is that, okay, companies who have got their space, they've got their 1,000 square meter worth of space. If they've paid for it, or if they have it, or if they own it, let's just say, they can't immediately reduce it necessarily because they are going to cut down. So again, the question is, how flexible are they with their spaces? How flexible are their landlords? And what are they going to do in terms long term, in terms of making sure that their space requirements actually meet with their company requirements and then actually allow for safe working. So I think in the short term, yes, 2 meters is what we know because we know that that's sort of to some extent the limiting factor of the virus travel in certain circumstances. How viable that will be long term, we don't know because we don't actually know what's going to happen. I love the fact that we're talking about the future when we don't know what the future has in store for any of us with this particular virus. So I think the main things that we need to think about now are how do we, with the situations that we have, with the knowledge that we do have, how can we mitigate the the non-social distancing effects? So how do we, as make sure that the buildings are kept sanitized? How do we ensure that as much as possible people don't have to touch things? Does that mean that landlords are going to have to reintroduce, I don't know, lift personnel into their lift, so that they restrict the number of people who come in and they are the only ones touching the buttons? Are we going to have to limit the number of people that go into shopping centers? Are we going to, these are some of the things that we're going to have to do short term. But in the long term depends on whether or not they find a quick way of testing, whether or not they find a vaccine, whether or not we are able to ramp up the healthcare facilities to be able to cope with people. It all is going to depend a lot, to a large extent, on the public health sector to actually understand what this virus really does and how we can contain it. And then that will trickle back into designs of buildings and that sort of thing. So I am, with every point that is made, and I'm sure the same with mine, there's a lot I agree with, and there's a lot I'm thinking, well, it asks more questions than I even have answers for. But I do believe that this 2-meter thing is not going to be, we're not going to be able to sustain it ad infinitum, and we're going to have to actually come up with a better way of keeping people safe than just saying we're going to set desks 2 meters apart, we're going to make our corridors 2.5 meters so that everybody can walk hugging the wall. It's just we're not engineered that way as human beings.
Yeah. All right.
I reach out to want to hug, and then I say, "Oh well, stay where you are." So we've got
to I guess we all have we've been taught new protocols to saying hi. There's the elbow bump, and you could just wave.
But then you get home and then strip straight away in case his shirt had something that has,
All right.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to let Iraku also comment on that, and that will be kind of like your final comments. But Iraku, I'll just also want you to kind of touch on and Erejua highlighted that. I'd like you to touch on some of the protocols that you think might be in place, for corridors, for common areas. What kind of new protocols do we expect to begin to see, even as we go back to work?
I think like you just rightfully called them common areas. There's little we can do on the social distancing part apart from redefining people's mindset about the way we communicate and we interact. So there's little we can do from a physical standpoint on that. They would remain common areas. They will remain places that people would share. I think from a technical standpoint, maybe, because a lot of these commercial buildings, for example, have central air cooling, no operable windows. So, the air is basically recycled, and that's the worst thing you can have, in transmitting a viral disease. So we may need to begin to look at some of our MEP systems. We may begin to look at improving the quality of the spaces with things like this to, other than social distancing, because like you've all rightfully said, that is only a very short-term approach. Some of the building systems we need to begin to lend itself to encourage a better and healthy environment for people to work in, because I'm not in facilities management, but I'm sure some of the MEP systems that we're installing with the filters, how often are they changed? How often are they cleaned? These kind of pandemics or health crisis will begin to allow us have a rethink about the way we manage buildings.
And this goes back, to the question of cost. So Iraku has raised an amazingly good point about air conditioning. Typically, you would maybe plan to clean your filters once a month, change them once in 3 for your air conditioning systems. Are we going to have to get to a situation where every night the operational manager goes around and changes the filters of these air conditioners every single night, so that you start every day with a fresh filter? the quality of these filters, are they going to have to go up so that they are, I think, is it N95 or whatever it is, so that it filters out, how does our extraction system work? And then, so for a lot of the new buildings that are coming in that have some kind of central air conditioning system, one of the things we as facility managers have always said is, don't just have one condenser, have enough condensers so that you can switch your air conditions on and off, so that each one of them is, because we've been primarily thinking of how do we section it for paying bills. So if a floor isn't fully occupied, you only switch on those air conditioners in those spaces that are occupied. And we've been thinking of it in terms of billing for electricity. But do we now need to think and be re-advising the architects and M&E engineers that no, you've got to devise air conditioning systems where each space only circulates the air in that space? Or if you can't afford to do that, or for some reason that isn't practical, how do we access those filters so that we can change them every single day? What is the makeup of these filters? And this comes back to the question of costs. So when you go back to the question of operational costs, when you think of a tenant of any building, he has three lots of costs. He has his rental, he has his service, he has operational costs, and he has his utilities. So even if the utility bill doesn't change, and the landlord cuts down his rental or gives him a rental holiday or some kind of discount in this period, or allows him to pay monthly in arrears or whatever, he still has his operational costs. And like Jamil has hinted, and like Irako has rightly pointed out, these are more likely to go up, at least in the short term, until we come to a new normal where they then settle back down. So I think as real estate people, we need to be putting all our prayers into making sure that the scientists find a cure. Otherwise, this is, and come up with ways. But that would only then deal with, COVID-19. What about the next respiratory or, pandemic that comes, SARS or MERS or something else? So I think that I think our social behavior is the first thing that really needs to be looked at. Because if each person sort of thinks, look, I need to take responsibility for myself and for the people around me, then by nature, we will actually be willing to work with whoever we are cohabiting with, or we're renting from, or we're renting to, or we're looking after. We'll be willing to actually to come to protocols that make it safe for us all to continue to work together.
Brilliant. This has been a very interesting discussion, and as we can tell, we could potentially go on for another hour. One thing is very certain: these are changing times. All right, and starting from our behavior is going to change. It's already changed, and it's going to stay that way. It's going to keep changing. There's going to be infrastructure changes, like we've rightly identified. Operational costs are potentially going to change, both in the short and in the long term. And there's also potentially going to be changes in the way the workplace is structured, in terms of, are we still going to have CBDs as we know it, or are they going to get gentrified? What's going to be that mix? Should they get gentrified? Lots of changes and interesting times. But one interesting thing that we can all take away from here is that one positive is that there is some level of globalization taking place, all right, in terms of standards, especially from an African perspective. A lot of us are taking our cues from the Western world. The healthcare providers are taking their cues from WHO and whichever country is getting it right. And that trickles down to our own sectors and our own markets. And that's a good thing, all right? Unlike back in the day where we typically would shut ourselves out and do things in our old way. So that's a positive that we can take from this. It's been interesting listening to all of you talk, and it's been a great pleasure moderating this session. Many thanks to API. Thank you to our attendees as well. Kafir.
Yes, thank you, Tayo. Thank you to the panel. It's been a great discussion. I think it also leads up great to next week's discussion, which will focus more in depth around the technology aspects. Thanks again, Tayo, for moderating. I thought it was an excellent and insightful panel. To the panelists, thank you for your time, and to the audience, thanks once again for tuning in. Obviously, we'll be sharing the link as well as the results to the polls. We'll be sharing the link to the video, so if anyone wants to rewatch or recapture the elements from the session. And then we'll be rolling on to our next series episode, which will be the adoption of PropTech in African real estate, which will take place next week. So on that point, we'll switch off for today. So thank you so much once again to the moderator and panelists, and we'll talk to everyone next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
How do I leave?